story recapped here. Today I'm gonna explain an action, adventure, and fantasy film called Clash of the Titans. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. A long time ago, the Titans ruled the earth before there were men and gods. However, despite being powerful, their reign was ended by their own sons, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Zeus then convinced Hades to create a beast that could defeat their parents, and from his own flesh, Hades gave birth to the Kraken. After that, Zeus became the king of the heavens while Poseidon ruled the seas. Unfortunately, Hades was tricked by Zeus, and so the underworld was left in his hands. Then, Zeus created men, and men's prayers fed the gods immortality. However, men soon became restless and started questioning the gods, eventually rising up against them. Meanwhile, somewhere in the middle of the sea, a fisherman named Perseus finds a coffin floating in the water. He then takes it into his boat and discovers a baby boy inside, but the infant's mother is already dead. So Perseus takes the child and prepares to go home to raise him as his own. On the other hand, the child's guardian, Io, watches them from afar, and she names the baby Perseus. 12 years later, Perseus becomes a strong man and makes sure to help his parents in everything they do, especially catching fish. Unfortunately, the gods don't bless them with a glorious bounty, and Perseus can't help but feel angry. Then, that night, Perseus feels restless as his father tells him how the storm brought them together. Perseus is sure that Perseus has questions for him about his identity, but Perseus makes it clear that it doesn't matter to him. The next day, Perseus and his family witness several soldiers from Argos destroy the statue of Zeus. Unfortunately, because of that, Hades orders his harpies to kill the soldiers before finally showing himself. Hades then destroys Perseus' boat and causes them to sink, and Perseus fails to save his family. Meanwhile, in Olympus, the gods start to argue about how they should deal with mortals. Zeus is enraged that humans dare to defy him, but he refuses to offer them a truce. Then, Hades shows up and points out the humans have grown strong because of Zeus' love. At the same time, Hades offers to punish the humans because they're now a threat to them, and despite being initially reluctant, Zeus allows his brother to do what he wants. On the other hand, the surviving soldiers of Argos take Perseus back to their city. There, Perseus faces King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, who brazenly disrespect the gods. However, Andromeda is much different from her parents, wishing only for peace and safety for their people. Unfortunately, Cassiopeia no longer fears the gods and even says Andromeda is more beautiful than Aphrodite. She also arrogantly compares themselves to the gods, angering Hades and causing him to wreak havoc on the palace. But despite the chaos, Hades finds it interesting that Perseus isn't harmed at all. Remembering what Hades did to his family, Perseus tries to exact revenge on him, but he's no match for the god of the underworld. Still, Perseus once again attempts to fight Hades, but Io shows up and tells him he'll have his chance someday. Then, Hades ages Cassiopeia to death and tells everyone he'll release the Kraken in 10 days, adding that sacrificing the princess is the only thing that'll save them. Unfortunately, before Hades leaves, Perseus learns from him that Zeus is his father. Meanwhile, Hermes informs Zeus there's a demigod in Argos. Hermes tells Zeus that Perseus is his son and thinks of offering him sanctuary, but the god of the heavens refuses. Back in Argos, Draco and his soldiers force Perseus to reveal his identity. Then, King Cepheus asks Perseus to save them since he believes he's the son of Zeus, but Perseus tells him he's just a man. Naturally, the king refuses to sacrifice his daughter, so Draco suggests they get the princess out of the city. However, Perseus points out that no one can hide from Hades. Later on, Io visits Perseus and reveals she guided him to his family. Perseus wants to know if she's a god, so Io says she was cursed with agelessness after refusing a god's advance. At the same time, Perseus asks if he's really the son of Zeus, and that's when Io tells him the story of his birth. Years ago, King Acrisius led a siege on Olympus after growing tired of the gods' mistreatment and cruelty. Because of that, the other gods wanted to lay waste to Acrisius and his army, but Zeus had other plans. Disguised as Acrisius, Zeus visited the king's wife and slept with her. Acrisius then ordered the execution of his wife and her newborn son, enraging Zeus and causing him to strike the king with lightning. Since then, Io has watched over Perseus. She says he was born to kill the Kraken, but the only thing Perseus can think about is getting back at Hades. So Io reveals that if the Kraken falls, Hades will be weak enough for Perseus to strike a deathly blow. Moments later, Perseus prepares to join Draco and the other soldiers in searching for the Stygian witches, who know exactly how to kill the Kraken. They are then joined by the brothers Ozal and Kasuk, who are both monster hunters. Meanwhile, Procopion stands quietly among the crowd, wondering what will happen to their city. On the other hand, Hades visits Acrisius, who now calls himself Calibos. Hades informs Calibos that Zeus' son with his wife survived, pointing out that the king killed the woman he loved for nothing. Hades says Zeus is unaware that he's growing stronger, but until he possesses his full power, he wants Calibos to be his weapon. So Hades grants power to the disfigured Calibos and orders him to kill Perseus. And in return, the god of the underworld promises to destroy Zeus for him. Meanwhile, Perseus' group stays in the woods to get some rest. Then, Draco teaches Perseus how to hold a sword and fight, intentionally making fun of him. So Perseus proves he's not as useless as they think, and Draco advises him to bring the god in him once they fight. After that, Perseus finds a sword in the woods and starts wielding it. However, upon learning from Draco that it's a gift from the gods, Perseus refuses to accept it. Perseus says he can complete his mission as a man, tossing the sword to Draco before finally walking away. But, despite Perseus' stubbornness, Draco still instructs his men to retrieve their savior. Concurrently, Perseus can't help but be amazed when a beautiful winged horse, Pegasus, comes to him. Io claims no one has ever ridden that magnificent creature, adding that it's a message from the gods. On the other hand, the soldiers looking for Perseus are killed by Calibos, and it isn't long before he comes after the demigod. Unfortunately, as they fight, Calibos mercilessly bites Perseus' arm. He also easily kills the other soldiers, and he only stops when Draco cuts off his hand. Then, Calibos is forced to flee when the soldiers show unity against him, but Perseus has no intention of letting him escape. Once Perseus runs after Calibos, the other men quickly follow him. However, they're unaware that Calibos' severed hand has started turning into a scorpion. Then, the brothers finally catch up to Calibos and manage to hit him, but they soon realize that the disfigured man's blood is giving birth to scorpions in the sand. Shortly after that, the soldiers fight against the giant scorpions. Most of them are immediately killed, and Perseus gets pinned against a pillar. Luckily, Io saves him from the scorpion, but the monster soon comes after her. Moments later, Draco and Perseus finally kill 2 scorpions, but their nightmare isn't over yet. It isn't long before more scorpions show up to kill the men. However, a group of desert conjurers called the Jinn shows up and paralyzes the scorpions, making Perseus wonder who they are. Solion then tells him they were once humans, but Perseus doesn't mind that and just wants to thank them. Unfortunately, he doesn't even manage to approach their rescuers, for the venom from Calibos' bite suddenly spreads throughout his body. Perseus then collapses and writhes in pain, and when Draco tells him to pray to Zeus for strength, he vehemently refuses. Back in Argos, Andromeda tries her best to tend to the people's needs. She then goes to the plaza and listens to Procopion, who asks everyone to turn their hearts to Hades. He wants the people to understand that sacrificing Andromeda is the only way to save their city, and he even burns his hand to prove that he's now loyal to Hades. Meanwhile, Draco and the other survivors lay their fallen comrades to rest. On the other hand, Solion explains to Eusebius that the sorcerers replace their limbs with charwood and black magic when they get injured in battle. Solion also adds that they feel no pain and can live for hundreds of years, but he makes it clear he doesn't trust them. Moments later, the Jinn leader uses black magic on Perseus' wound. Of course, Draco and Solion quickly try to stop him, but the sorcerer reveals he wants to help Perseus because he knows he's the one who will free them from the gods. Sure enough, Perseus comes out of his tent as his arm heals, and that's when they all realize they must work together. Later on, Draco comes at Percy for refusing the sword from Zeus, saying his pride is killing their men. But despite that, Perseus still insists on doing everything as a man, so Draco reminds him he's not just a man, telling him he'll keep his sword until he decides to use it. Then, the sorcerers start controlling the scorpions, which they use to travel across the desert. After a few days, Perseus' group finally reaches the Garden of Stygia, where the Kraken defeated the Titans. Then, Perseus wastes no time and quickly asks the witches how to defeat the Kraken, but the hags demand payment for answering his question and start attacking everyone. So Perseus takes their eye and threatens to get rid of it if they don't say how to defeat the Kraken, forcing the witches to mention Medusa, whose gaze will kill anything of flesh. The witches then tell them they can find Medusa across the river Styx, but as the men prepare to leave, the hags reveal to Perseus that he's destined to die. After that, the Jinn, except for their leader, decide to leave Perseus' group. Meanwhile, Zeus visits Perseus and offers him sanctuary because he knows the Kraken and Hades can't be defeated. Zeus also wants Perseus to come with him to Olympus, but his son simply refuses his offer, so Zeus just gives him a golden drachma, telling him it's expensive where he's going. Moments later, the monster hunters give Perseus a shield and inform him they're leaving too. Despite that, Perseus still leads the others to the underworld, where they use the drachma as a bribe for the ferrymen to get them across the river. Then, while on the boat, Io reveals how Athena cursed Medusa after being violated by Poseidon. Medusa thought the goddess would protect protect her, but Athena was disgusted and made sure that no one would ever want her again. Unfortunately, anyone who looks at Medusa will turn into stone, and since only men are allowed in the temple, Io tells everyone she can't assist them there. Upon reaching Medusa's lair, Perseus reminds the soldiers to keep their eyes down. Unfortunately, they soon get ambushed by Medusa, and they immediately lose Solion. Meanwhile, Draco becomes weak after getting hit by an arrow and orders Ixius and Eusebius to flank the Gorgon. However, Medusa easily turns Ixius into stone, and it isn't long before she claims Eusebius too. Sadly, Perseus doesn't even have time to grieve, for he quickly needs to find a way to kill Medusa. Perseus then instructs the Jinn leader to get ready while he distracts Medusa, making the Gorgon chase him around. Unfortunately, the sorcerer only scathes Medusa when he tries to kill her, but the Gorgon fails to turn him into stone. So the Jinn leader self-destructs and manages to injure Medusa, and Draco makes sure to trap her by impaling her body on the ground even if it means sacrificing his life. With no time to waste, Perseus uses the underside of his shield to see where Medusa is, before closing his eyes and beheading her. Then, Perseus takes Medusa's severed head and leaves the underworld, only to witness Io getting stabbed by Calibos. Enraged, Perseus fights Calibos, but his sword unexpectedly breaks, so he finally decides to use Zeus' gift and stabs Calibos, but he doesn't expect the disfigured man to return to his normal appearance. Then, before falling off the cliff, Calibos tells Perseus not to become one of the gods. After that, Perseus quickly tends to Io. Unfortunately, Io is already dying, so she urges Perseus to head to Argos before it's too late. She also assures Perseus that everything will be alright, and as she disappears, Pegasus suddenly shows up. Taking that as his cue to make a move, the son of Zeus gathers his weapons and rides the majestic creature to Argos. Meanwhile, Zeus eventually instructs Hades to release the Kraken, so Procopion leads the people of Argos to take Andromeda and sacrifice her to the monster, but the princess voluntarily surrenders. Procopion then has Andromeda tied by the wrists and offered to the Kraken, but it still proceeds to destroy their city. On the other hand, Hades finally shows his true colors and admits to Zeus he only serves himself. Hades still resents Zeus for sending him to the underworld, and he makes it clear that his brother's reign is now over. At the same time, Hades wants Zeus to suffer as the Kraken kills his beloved humans, but the god of the heavens reminds him there's still a demigod in Argos. As the Kraken lays waste to the city, Perseus finally arrives to kill the monster. However, Hades orders his harpies to stop Perseus, and he eventually loses the bag containing Medusa's head. So Perseus does his best to retrieve the head, and it isn't long before the monster hunters show up to help kill the harpies. Moments later, Perseus finally manages to kill the harpy that stole Medusa's head. Then, he quickly takes the head and shows it to the Kraken before it eats Andromeda, causing it to turn into stone. On the other hand, Procopion tries to kill Perseus after witnessing what he did, so King Cepheus stops him. Enraged, Procopion stabs the king, but they both end up getting crushed by the Kraken's claw. Meanwhile, Hades stops Perseus from saving Andromeda when she falls into the water. At the same time, he tells Perseus he can't be killed since he's a god, so Perseus uses his Olympian sword to send him back to the underworld. Then, Perseus quickly rescues Andromeda, who later suggests they rule Argos together. However, Perseus refuses, saying he can serve her better as a man before finally leaving. Later on, Zeus visits Perseus and reminds him that Hades will soon return once men grow weak. He also asks Perseus to take his place in Olympus, but once again, Perseus refuses. Defeated, Zeus resurrects Io to express his gratitude, and for the first time, Perseus immediately accepts his father's gift.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.